Hi, everybody. Before I started, I wanted to take this moment, since I'm the last speaker, to thank the organizers and the volunteers and everybody who's put this together, because this has been a really sweet conference. I came all the way around the world to come here, and it's blown my mind. So if everybody could just give them a round of applause. So, who am I? Well, I'm actually not the chief scientist of Social Volt anymore. I am. That was an old bio. I actually work for myself. I'm a freelancer consultant. I live in Seattle. It's about 3:30 in the morning in Seattle right now, so I'm a little tired, but I'm very excited to give this talk. If you want any information on me, go to my website. You can follow me on Twitter. You can do whatever you want. Always willing to hear new ideas, talk to new people. So 4 months ago, I was digging into some new code. And every time I dig into new code, I try to figure out what the hell anything is doing. So I started this project, and there was a lot of legacy code. There was a lot of code that was run by, it was built by contractors, by people who left the company. There was a lot of churn. And this came up. This is crazy. I mean, you look at this, and we're evaling some type off of a class that's turning it into a string, and then substituting endpoint for a blank string, and then adding on post. And all that does is return a class. This is a constant. This is crazy. What are we doing? And so over the last, 3 to 4 months, I've been complaining to everybody, just saying, this is crazy. I love Ruby. Ruby is such an awesome language. But everybody is just taking it too far. Not everybody, but people are doing this. They're doing eval, they're doing MethodMissing, they're doing monkey patching without any regard. And so I finally got to this point where I'm just sitting here and I'm screaming at the top of my lungs, and I've just had enough. So I think it's time for us to stop this madness. And this talk today will hopefully help you with that a little bit. And I'm only going to talk about 3 things, but we're going to deep dive into MethodMissing. So this is the thing a lot of people have heard about. If you've heard about Metaprogramming, you've probably heard of MethodMissing. Then we're going to talk about monkey patching, which is kind of a Ruby type of a thing. I haven't really seen it used much elsewhere. And then eval. With each of these, I'll go through and I'll show you some really bad examples that I've actually seen in real life. Then I'll have some suggestions that you could use, because a lot of the time you don't have to use MethodMissing. You don't have to monkey patch things. You don't have to use eval. And hopefully by the end of it, you'll be able to do responsible metaprogramming. Ruby is such a sweet language. Everybody here knows this, because it's able to write code dynamically. I mean, that just blows my mind. I know Lisp does it, but Ruby just makes it so accessible and awesome. I mean, you can write methods dynamically. You can do all these really sweet things with it. But we have to take that power with a little bit of responsibility. It's a double-edged sword. If you just go crazy with your code, you're going to cause your friends to just hate you because you have that eval statement that doesn't make any sense. So I've come up with 3 things that help me in determining whether what is written is good or not. So whether we should keep it or we should rethink it. So when we think about metaprogramming, 1, does it make any sense? I mean, this sounds funny, right? But think about it. Ruby is the language that is supposed to be natural type. It's supposed to be able to, you're supposed to be able to talk Ruby. It's like supposed to be more like a sentence. But I've seen these one-liners that are like 20, just crazy long, and I have no idea what they're doing. So it doesn't make any sense. Another thing, does it introduce edge cases, or does it allow it? Now, of course, we can't test for all the edge cases that we don't know about. Edge cases are things that just come up, they happen. That's just life. But if we're allowing everything to go through, and we're just letting everything willy-nilly go through our application, we're not really being diligent. And last, this is funny, because a lot of the time when people are using some sort of method missing or eval, or they're opening things up and changing them around, a lot of the time they don't need to. There's a lot of really sweet methods. There's the standard library just has an awesome API that you can take advantage of. There's so much out there that you can utilize without writing code that doesn't make any sense and that has edge cases. So let's move on to method missing. Who here has heard of method missing? Okay, awesome. When I first learned about metaprogramming, this is what I learned about method missing. And it blew my mind with, you have a class that has method missing on it, and you can call methods that don't actually exist on the class, and you can write logic behind it. And that's cool, right? I mean, you have dynamic methods, and things can happen. But I think in a lot of circumstances, you'll get code like this, where you have an API, and the guy's like, okay, well, I have this RESTful API, and I want the method to be the same endpoint on this RESTful API. So let's just use method missing, pass it through to this HTTP client, and then get, right? That sounds cool until you realize, okay, well, wait, maybe I shouldn't allow everything to go through. So then, okay, let's add on a regular expression. Okay. Well, okay, you look at that, and then you say, oh, wait, my regular expression is incorrect, so I better fix that. And then you look at this again, and you're like, okay, well, what happens if I call a method that doesn't exist in that regular expression? It returns nil. Okay, so I should probably raise the no method error, right? I mean, and I've been there. I know how it is. I've seen this so many times, and this doesn't make any freaking sense to me. I don't understand it. It doesn't make any sense to me at all, because it's you have methods that exist inside of a regular expression, and it doesn't communicate effectively enough what you're trying to do. And when it comes to edge cases, you have everything inside of a regular expression, or you have some kind of a match, or you're trying to do some weird lexical analysis on this name that comes through. It just allows you, there's too many bugs that can happen. And there is a better way of doing it. This is how I would approach it. Define method is so much better in so many circumstances that I try to go for define method first if I'm going to use something that's a dynamic method or a dynamically created method. And when you look at this, you just have your array of methods that you're creating. You're iterating through each one, and you're defining a method. When you read that, it makes sense, right? You read it and you say, okay, well, I'm creating all these methods, and they're going to call a HTTP endpoint. No big deal. I don't have to worry about adding in a regular expression. I don't have to add in raising a no method error. I don't have to do any of that. And it's so much more concise. And that is essentially important. But then that gets back to, why do we have method missing? Why is it there in the first place? There are certain circumstances where it makes sense. I think, for instance, something like OpenStruct or Hashy, where you have like a JSON style object that you can call it bracket notation or you can call dot notation. That makes sense. Or an XML builder, that sort of a thing. But it really needs to be like fully dynamic, like user inputted type things. So let's move on to monkey patching. Monkey patching is kind of an odd duck, I think. It's definitely something that when I talk to somebody who's not a Ruby developer, this is the first thing that they push at me and saying, wow, this is completely stupid. You guys are out of your mind for doing this. Because of things like this. I mean, this is asinine, right? But Ruby allows you to do this. I mean, it's cool, but at the same time, I won't go any further. It's just, yeah. And, you know, I can understand it, but you think about the edge cases that it involves, that it brings in, and there's so many problems with monkey patching. Yehuda Katz, he wrote a blog post about the AWS gem that was monkey patching, I can't remember what it was, a string or something like that, and it was colliding with the active support core extension, and basically what happens is when you're monkey patching somebody else's code and they update their code and their assumptions change and yours don't, then everything just goes to crap. And is there a better way to do this, or somebody solved this monkey patching before? This is kind of a better way to do it. This is what Ola Benny, he came up with this idea of, basically just make a module and mix it in later. And that's a pretty cool way. It's safer, but it's still not extremely safe. The nice thing about doing it this way is that when you're looking at debugging, you can at least know where the bug actually happened, as opposed to seeing a stack trace where, string 2s caused an error. I mean, in this case, it would be inside of string utils. This is a better way of doing it. In Ruby 2.0, they're actually coming out with refinements, which is going to be really awesome. But of course, Ruby 2.0 isn't out yet. And so, if you have the choice, try to do something like this where you're not monkey patching at all. So let's get back to why monkey patching at all. A couple of times, especially when I was doing a couple Rails projects, and there was that really bad situation where you're running like Ruby 191 on Rails 235, and there was all these encoding issues with ERB, and the only way that I could end up fixing it like quickly was to use monkey patching by basically overriding what ERB did. I didn't really feel so good about doing it, but sometimes when you have deadlines, you kind of have to. So it's something that you can use in really strict moderation. And this gets us to the worst one of all. Eval. Eval is a very odd construct. It's important to have because you should be able to evaluate code inside of an interpreter, obviously, but it just allows you so much free reign. For instance, this I've seen over and over again, where somebody will have a variable that actually is a constant name, and then they'll eval the variable to get the constant name. That's just not the right way of doing it. And I think this is even worse, where somebody will use class eval, and they'll define a method dynamically. I mean, can't you just use a defined method? So, eval, I think, is probably one of the most less understood ones, because if you remember from the original piece of code that I threw up there with eval and the self type, 2s, all of that, it's just confusing, because you're generally speaking, you're concatenating strings together that's executing code, and it's just really dangerous, right? And you get into the dangerous part of, does it allow edge cases? Well, imagine happens if you have this. So your constant is all of a sudden system rm-rf star, and you evaluate that. Yeah, it's going to actually work, right? I tested this out. Yeah, it does work. I really don't recommend that you do that, but people have solved this before. A lot of the time, you don't have to use eval. And for some reason, every time I see somebody using eval, it's always for the same reason. And I don't know why this is, but they're using it to search for a constant, a variable, something, or they're trying to set constants, or they're trying to set variables. So why don't we use something like constget? Constget is pretty awesome if you need to dynamically get a constant. So if you have constant equals object or whatever, you can, kernel const get, right? There's also const set as well. But the neat thing about const get, I think, is that it's actually a module function. Oh, jeez. Come on. It's actually a module function. So let's say that you have, for instance, this module foo with a constant baz in it. Well, instead of calling kernel const get, foo : baz, you can call it on the class itself or the module. I mean, it's extremely helpful because you're able to actually tighten up your code quite a bit. You are much more specific with what you're looking for. And for instance, if you throw in something like system rm-rf star, what do you think is going to happen with const get? Anybody? Yeah, it gives you an error. I mean, if you're looking for a constant and you're not getting back an error when you call something that's not a constant but actually just, crazy text, I mean, that's not so, right? So, I mean, this stuff all sounds super simple, but it's important to make sure that within our control, we can actually we can do it in a way so that when there's actually an error, it throws an exception. Seems simple enough. I've also seen this too, where people they're dynamically getting instance variables or setting instance variables. Yeah, instance variable get and set work perfectly good. And also there's class variable get and class variable set. But that gets us into, there is no local variable set or global variable set or get, right? Yeah, it doesn't exist. And when I did a little bit of research on eval, and it was funny. There's a post on Stack Exchange about we have eval, like what's the friggin' point? And somebody basically said, well, okay, you can't get global variables dynamically, you can't get local variables dynamically, so try eval or whatever. And I think the reason that Ruby doesn't have either one of these is actually for a specific reason. And that is, if you're writing a method that you have to dynamically go and get local variables, you're probably doing it wrong. I mean, the only reason I can think of you have like, let's say 300 local variables is if your method is like 3,000 lines long. So why do we need to dynamically even get local variables? It's the same thing with global variables. Generally speaking, they're kind of it's kind of a construct that most Ruby people stay away from because you're sharing state across everything. And I mean, that can be good for very certain circumstances, but I think overall you shouldn't have that many global variables to have to deal with. You shouldn't have to say, I need to eval for this global variable that is dynamically made or set or whatever, because you shouldn't have like 300 global variables. But yeah, then we get back into why is eval okay. Now, I think obviously eval exists because there has to be a way to evaluate code inside of the interpreter that's evaluating code. It's kind of a meta thing, but if you think about it, if you're running code in Ruby, in the Ruby interpreter, you should be able to run code inside of the Ruby interpreter, right? Seems simple enough. Well, the reason I can think of that eval even exists and is really important actually is for something like RubyMonk, online console type thing, IRB. If you're going to evaluate code that somebody's using, yeah, you're going to have to use eval. There's really no better way to do it unless you want to build your own lexical parser and go from there. So we went over a couple of things, and I'm going to tie it all together. We went over method missing, and I really hope that people, instead of using method missing, they start to use define method instead. I hope that monkey patching is used in moderation. And I hope eval is, definitely kept on the wayside. Now, the one thing that I definitely want everybody to take from this is that, we're all Ruby programmers, and Ruby is an extremely dynamic language. It allows you to do amazing things that you couldn't do in Java, you couldn't do in many other languages. It's important to stay within some bounds. So it's important to have some responsibility. And, everybody does it. Sometimes you get up against a deadline and you have to push out code and you're hacking stuff away and you're in your IRB session and you get it to work and then you just ship it. And that's cool. Or the other circumstance where you have your tests all passing, they're all green, you go from red to green, and then you ship it, and you forget about refactoring, or you forget about cleaning up your code and making it work in a way that is less bug-ridden or is less loose, so to speak. And so with that, I wanted to keep this talk really short, especially, oh geez. Well, there we go. Well, there we go. So let's do this in the dark, okay? I wanted to keep this really, the talk portion really short because I wanted to hear questions from every one of you. Oh, there we go. Let there be light. So yeah, you guys have any questions for me? Willing to hear them. Bueller? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. So if you are going to use method missing, and obviously there are times when you do want to, you have to use it.
Yeah.
You need to be careful to override your respond to as well, so that the same kind of patterns or whatever you're putting in there, it's so that the contract is still met and so the outside world like doesn't behave in a weird,
Well,
unexpected way.
that's another thing is, if you create a class with method missing in it, and you're just kind of letting any method go. Let's say you open that class up in like an IRB session, and you call methods on it. The methods don't exist, and so when you're calling like respond to or whatever, it just all of your code doesn't work. And Ruby is a duck typed language, so you should be able to test whether it responds to a method or not. And it's pretty aggravating when you can't test whether something responds to a method or not. So yeah, way back there.
So you've kind of gone over some things which are somewhat like anti-patterns, could I say? Um, can you go over a few of your thoughts on anti-patterns when it comes to coupling between different components in your Ruby program?
So anti-patterns, I couldn't hear all of it. It was
Anti-patterns with regard to excessive coupling between different components or different parts of your Ruby program.
oh, you mean like
Like
too much coupling?
yeah,
Okay.
things that are not easy to change.
Oh, yeah. Um, yeah, my experience with that has been pretty interesting because the things that are hard to change are some really clever hacks that people do. Um, I mean, tightly coupling, yeah, that causes some problems too. But at least recently, I've been running into a lot of people doing these like clever metaprogramming hacks, and it makes it almost impossible to change because you have some eval that's just like executing a bunch of code that goes down and does something else. And yeah, I don't know if that answers your question though. um, yeah, is that answer your question or no? Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's another thing. Here's something. The one thing that I've seen that's really bad is people overusing send. So like they'll overuse send and then they'll go into like private and protected methods, and they'll be sending things that really they shouldn't have access to. So I mean that's kind of more of a violation of the law of Demeter. So it's like you know way too much about the object. Um, so I'd say that if you see people using send way too much, that's kind of an anti-pattern. I didn't put it into this, but it could definitely be in there. Yeah, cool. Yeah. Subclassing. Yeah, subclassing is actually a reasonable way of doing it. I mean, compared to monkey patching. Okay, yeah. I think so. The difference is when you're subclassing, you're creating a whole new class altogether. So, like, let's say you create like a string class that only goes to integers or whatever, So you call it like string int or something. That's different than including a module inside of the string. So, yeah, it's actually safer to subclass, and to put a child class on that. But I think. Yeah, you could do that. Oh, well, yeah. I mean, you could do that. Yeah, sure. Okay, okay. Who else? Come on, there's gotta be somebody else. Yeah.
So I have so even this happened in my case as well. So what I have observed so far, so in when 3 4 years back when I was writing Java code,
Mhm.
then I specifically used to write protected or private. But now it's not happening in Ruby. I usually don't tend to write protected and private methods in Ruby.
I didn't hear the last part. Sorry, they were loud.
So in Ruby now, I don't specifically go and define methods private and protected, though they are tend to be. So it's like okay, open. They are open to all the users, but I know that they are not going to call them.
So you're creating protected defined method stuff, or
so have you observed this kind of pattern in your code reviews or in other developers' code that they now forget to define protected and private scope?
Yeah, that's definitely something I've noticed a lot, especially in code reviews, is people tend to forget about private and protected altogether, and they make everything public. So yeah, that's definitely something to take notice of, because like I think everybody who switched over from Java or C# to Ruby, it was just like, oh, we don't have to worry about this crap anymore, so whatever, I'll just create a bunch of methods and call it good. But I mean, they're there for a reason. So yeah, I think it's a really important thing to think about. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's an interesting idea of undefing methods. So like taking all the methods out of an object, right, and then defining your new methods on it. That's kind of cool. Although you have to be really careful when you're undefing things that should be there, like ID and like really important things that Ruby is gonna want. So you have to be careful with doing that. Come on. Anybody else? Okay. Well, shit. Okay. Thank you.